Good afternoon. We will begin, if you want. As we have seen the last time, there was a kind of a certain permanency of the human figure, even with abstractionists like Pellan and Bourdieu. And one explanation of that, it is that they went both through the same type of academic education. They were at the School of Fine Arts, and they learned how to draw the figure. They went through anatomy, perspective, and everything, all these courses that were deemed like very essential at the time in the School of Fine Arts. The problem that we will have today, it's a little bit more complicated, and it's not so astonishing. The more you advance in time and the more you deal with more contemporary artists, the relation with the figure is less clear, is more obscure, if you want, more difficult to grasp. And we will speak today of the work, I would say, almost in all the aspect of Françoise Sullivan, S-U-L-L-I-V-A-N. Françoise Sullivan. You know, maybe most of you, that she had an important retrospective here in this museum last year, and this, at the time, gave me the idea maybe to deal a little bit with her work. So that's maybe the fruit of the reflection I did since that exhibition that I will present this afternoon. She went to the School of Fine Arts exactly like Bourdieu did, the School of Fine Arts of Montreal. At the time, there was a kind of two-step, I would say, that you have to cross to get really to this type of education. Maillard, the director, had the idea to make a kind of preparatory school to the School of Fine Arts. So he organized some courses at the Monument National. You know where it is. It's on St. Lawrence Street, near, I would say, Dorchester, or, pardon, René Lévesque. Okay. And so that in that region, you have this big structure there, which still exists, used for many purposes now. But at the time, it was like an important place for theater and for music and all that, but also for a kind of evening courses of drawing, especially, in order that they will discover maybe the best talents and then to send them to the School of Fine Arts on, at the time, Saint-Urbain Street. It was not where it was when I was there in the 60s. It was not on Sherbrooke Street, but on Saint-Urbain, near Sherbrooke, where you have now, I think, offices of the city. And so there were these two steps, and Françoise Sullivan followed these two steps. In 1939, when she was only 14 years old, she followed some courses of drawing at the Monument National, and then in 1941, finally, she was accepted to the School of Fine Arts of Montreal. At the time, it was still Maillard who was the director of the school. Maillard himself was a painter, but not of great consequence, I would say. He's dead now, he cannot punish me, maybe. But no, but he was, I would say, very adroit, very clever and all that, but not a very important painter. And he had this idea that we should treat subject matter like religious subject matter would be good for our students, and also historical one. And that was a way to express a certain nationalism, which is surprising in a way because Maillard himself was a Frenchman. He was born in North Africa, immigrated in Canada in 1912, went back to France during the First World War and served as a soldier and as a brave soldier during that period of 1914-1918, and came back to Montreal after in the 20s and became the director of the school right away at the beginning in 1927. So he was still there. And with him, of course, the still type of education, the same type of ideas. Maillard himself was claiming that he didn't want to innovate, he wanted to follow the lead of the secretary of the province at the time was Athanase David. And David made many declarations in which he says, our School of Fine Arts will not be influenced by the trends of European art, of modern art. We want to give solid formation to our students, and that's it. So there was, and you could find the same type of discourse also in the mouth of Maillard, like in David. Of course, with the time, this type of discourse become less and less popular, and Maillard was clever enough to think that he should hire in his school people a little bit more open than the one that he had around him. And that's why in 1943, he let Pellan enter in the school. Pellan negotiated hard with him and all that. It says, I want to have free time to make my own work. And it was so. And the other painter also that was hired about the same time is Stanley Cosgrove. So you could say Maillard was trying to open a little bit the scope of his school by these two hirings. But for some of the students, it was already too late, because already in 41, and even the end of the 40, they had made contact with another teacher from another school, with Paul-Émile Bordua, from the school of l'École du Meuble. So you do have right away, among the students, and I would say Sullivan is a good case of that, among the students, a division between these two masters. If you go to Quebec City this summer, there is an exhibition there of two students, ex-students, because now they are my age, I guess. They are still students, but not as we should. And of one is called Mimi Parent, she's a woman, and the other Jean Benoit. And if you have the chance to see their work, it's interesting. They are presented like surrealist painters today because they live all their life in France. And both of them were rather attracted by Pellan than Bordua. For instance, Jean Benoit was born in Quebec City, and he saw in 1940 the exhibition of Pellan that I showed you last time with the slides and with the photos, you remember, when it was presented in Quebec City, and they become friends right away at that time in 40. And then Benoit came in 43 in Montreal and followed still the course of Pellan. Mimi Parent did almost the same thing, but different date. She was from Montreal. She entered in the School of Fine Arts of Montreal in 1940. And then when Pellan began to teach there, she became also very interesting by his teaching. She was 1 year older than the group who will form the Automatistes, if you want. So she was a little bit not in contact with them. And these two students from, let's say, friends of Pellan, will be important in 1945 when there will be this big contestation against Maillard. I think I spoke of it, the famous Abba Maillard et l'Académisme. These were the leader of this demonstration. It was not the future Automatistes who did that. It was Benoit and Mimi Parent that were behind this thing, and probably were the people who took care of to print these little posters and to glue them all over the place during let's see, the show of the end of the year of the School of Fine Arts. I cannot show you, I look in the slide collection of Concordia, I didn't find anything by Benoit. And maybe it could be explained, because Benoit is absolutely obsessed with sex and with sadism and all that. This is him who have made a famous enterrement du Marquis de Sade, during which he had a kind of iron, the word Sade was written with iron. He put it in fire and just impress it on his skin like this to have the name of Sade for the rest of his life. It seems that Mata was there too at the ceremony, wanted to do the same, and the only thing you hear on tapes that were done at the time is, ouch! And this is Mata, of course, that they didn't appreciate the system. Just to give you an idea of this type of guy. So we don't have slide of, but we do have a slide of work of Mimi Parent of 1940, which is interesting to put in parallel with Alfred Pellan, that I show you on the right side. The one, of course, is a still life in both cases, and you see that they have a lot of affinity between both, which is not surprising. After all, in 1940, she's his first year student. She's impressed by Pellan, who come from Paris and all that, and she tried more or less to imitate him. So that was one of the possibility at the time to go with Pellan if you are a student of fine arts. With Sullivan, the situation is a little bit complicated, and I will try to summarize it. First, she is friend, I would say, from her childhood with Pierre Gauvreau. And Pierre Gauvreau will be one of the most important automatists, if you want. He will be very close to Bordua for a long time. And so at first, I would say, because of her friendship with Gauvreau, and she could be normally she would be attracted to Bordua group. But on the other hand, at a certain point of her career, during her student years, she became a little bit dissatisfied with her own painting. And it's hard exactly to understand what happened, or she was lost a little bit with what Bordua and the automatists were proposing. And then she decided that she could not cope with this. And then she decided, what was a crime, of course, in the group of Bordua, to follow Pellan for a year exclusively. This was hard to forgive. You see, when Claude Gauvreau speaks of that, he speaks of that during that year she made horrible, he called it the croûte. This is not nice, of course, it means horrible paintings influenced by Pellan. And indeed, you could imagine a little bit probably in that style. None of these paintings, to my knowledge, have been saved. Probably Sullivan then destroyed them later. But she was tempted to go back to Pellan, probably because of the type of problem were raised by Bordua with the unconscious, with the working from within, all of that. Maybe she was not prepared to do this. We should not forget that these people are very young at the time. And she was 16 when she entered in the School of Fine Arts. And the only works we know of this period, I will show you a few examples, are all figurative. All the paintings she made during her stay in Beaux-Arts are figurative. And not only that, most of them, I know only one who is a still life, but all the others are portrait or representation of the human figure. So in a way, to go from there right away to kind of abstraction that Bordua was proposing was maybe too difficult, was maybe not clear anyway. And she felt probably that Pellan could be one step further in modernism before reaching maybe this thing. Whatever happened, we really don't know, because it's too far in time and it's complicated. But there is something of a crisis, I think, in a way, with her own painting. And indeed, when you look what she was doing, like here, a self-portrait with, she called it la figure barbouillée. Barbouillé, it's almost a joual term. It means smeared, if you want, with as if. So there was many commentary about that she wanted to wear like paint, face paint, let's say, maybe like an Indian and all that. I'm not sure of that. I think it's just maladresse, you know, that you could expect of somebody who's at the beginning of the school and do her best, but it turned like this, that she have this white spot on her face. In fact, what she could be aiming at, like these two other examples, let's say, of tête d'Indienne, again, will be to integrate a little bit what we would call a kind of general fauvism. The idea that the color could be relatively independent of reality, could be free, but nevertheless you maintain a structure of a face, of a personage. And these are portraits of two little Indian girls that she met in the north, in the Laurentides, during one of her summer holiday, let's say. And so you could say there is certainly a certain relation to fauvism. And indeed, maybe it's not nice to do that, but it could be interesting to compare it to the great painting of that school, like Matisse, like you see on the right, La Femme au Chapeau, which is a representation of his own wife, as you know. Madame Matisse was a modiste. She was doing this incredible hat. It's like if you have a whole nest on your head. It's something a nest with the chicken on it. It's really a lot of things. Anyway, that was her craft, and this painting was presented and made an enormous scandal because of the usage of color there. If you look at the face, you have green, you have whitish, you have all the color imaginable. Even you have a red spot here in her neck. And it continues, even the background is treated like that. And you see at the time, so people shouted, oh, c'est de la folie, it's crazy and all that. But we are reminded also of this word of Gide, who says, no, it's not craziness. It is the application of theories, meaning that it's too intellectual, which it's not genuine enough. It starts from a kind of principle that color should be more important than form. And this is also one of the reproach that Maurice Denis did to that painting. Maurice Denis was close to Matisse, but he said, maybe you go too far in color, you lose the form, you lose the shapes. And in fact, also, when Matisse did another portrait of his wife, a little brother, it's called La Raie Verte, the kind of the green stripe in the middle of her face, he reduced this aspect of color, gave it much more precise form, if you want, and precise volume, and in a way answer the critique of Maurice Denis. So you could say, well, these early works of Sullivan fell well in that type of context, and it could be explained that way. You see, like somebody who tried to grasp in the modern movement, a movement who is not too abstract, if you want, or not too far-fetched, like the Fauve. And also the fact that she was interested in Indian subject, I think could be attached also to a tradition in our own painting, in our Canadian painting. I'm thinking, of course, of Émilie Carr. This is an early Émilie Carr representing children in a school in Lytton, somewhere on the Vancouver Island. And you could say, well, what Sullivan was trying to do was to go in that direction by this portrait of Indian, and in terms of style, by the influence of Fauvism. So you see that to go from there to Pelin makes sense in a way, because before really plunging in automatism, it makes sense. It's like a possible intermediary toward. But Pelin was a much more directive, I would say, much more authoritarian type of personality than Bordeaux was. And you have the proof of it in the disciple of Pelin. The disciple of Pelin paints like Pelin, as if he was very often intervening in their painting. He said, no, do like this. And say, this professor in School of Fine Arts will do that now, will be fired, I guess. But at the time, he was, no, you have to correct this. This is the way to paint it and all that. He was quite authoritarian. So habitually, his own disciples finish by looking like him. When you have an exhibition of Pelin students, it looks like Pelin. And maybe then she revolted against that, because after all, she was also with Bordeaux for a while, and this idea was contrary to her aspiration. And then she decided to quit painting for a while. In fact, she had another possibility, because early in her childhood, she learned dance. And she learned not modern dance, but classic ballet. Since she was, I think, 6 years old or something like that. She came from a relatively not wealthy, but a kind of bourgeois family in which little girls should go to ballet school and should go to drawing school and everything. As if the more bourgeois you become, the more you get rid of your children every evening, because you are busy, of course. And so you send them to school like this. And they had, she had then this kind of ballet training since long time. And toward the end of her stay at the School of Fine Art, she decided to go back to dance. And maybe in a way, it was like how she fell in an impasse. On one hand, she was a figurative painter with some ambition as to become a painter. On the other hand, when she tried to be more modern, she go to Pelin, and then she realized that all the group that she was interested in, Gauvreau and the others, were not doing that, were doing much more far-fetched type of work, and she felt lost. She's not the only one to have reacted like this. You have also Madeleine Arbour, who says exactly the same thing. She says, I wanted to be a painter around when I was 19 and 20, but then when I saw what the boys were doing, I didn't understand what they were doing, and I preferred to go toward decoration, let's say, and she became an excellent decorator, but she also dropped painting about the same time for probably kind of similar reason. But in the case of Sullivan, it was fantastic because she could go to really something else, to dance. Before that, I will show you a little bit how the contact with Bordeaux was done. Let's see, the student of the School of Fine Arts normally should not have contact with Bordeaux. Bordeaux was in another school. It was a school of furniture, of applied art, as you call it now. But what happened, there was an exhibition organized at the Collège Sainte-Marie. It's a little bit complicated, but anyway, you will try to follow me. Collège Sainte-Marie was a collège classique, like you used to have in these days, where the Jesuits were the teachers. And the Jesuits are rather intellectual priests, and they decided to make a little exhibition of painting in the autumn of 1940. And then Pierre Gauvreau, who was an ex-student of the Collège Sainte-Marie, mind you, he was thrown from the school. It was not the best recommendation, but anyway, it was 2 years before, so the priest forgot about it, I don't know. So they accepted his work, and they asked Bordeaux to judge the display, meaning that give a prize to the best student. And Bordeaux chose Pierre Gauvreau without knowing him. He thought he was the best painter there, and he gave the prize to them. So the Jesuits were not too happy, because after all, it was somebody that they threw him out of the school because he read some Rimbaud or I don't know which book, who was in the index, of course, so he was put out. And so then Bordeaux says, I would like to meet this Pierre Gauvreau that I don't know, since he's an interesting painter. And that's the way they make the connection. And Gauvreau brought with him other students of the School of Fine Arts, among them Françoise Sullivan. This is a portrait of Bruno Cormier done by Pierre Gauvreau. And I think I have a photo here. What is this here? Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Well, this has been inverted. This is a photo of Bruno Cormier during his school. He was at the Collège Sainte-Marie also. It's him who heard of the exhibition organized by the priest and contacted Pierre Gauvreau. And you have on the left drawing by Pierre Gauvreau of this man, Bruno Cormier. You know Bruno Cormier, he became a very important psychoanalyst and criminologist. He died recently, but he's one of the pillars of the Institut Pinel. And he was also one of the people who was not an artist really, who signed the Refus Global, the manifesto of Bordeaux. So he's an interesting character. For a doctor, he was the only one really in the group who risked a lot by signing Refus Global, because he was a student at Université de Montréal. At the time, Université de Montréal had a priest or even a Monsignor as a rector, and this was not the thing to do, if you want to have your diploma. So he took a lot of risk, and everything went well, and he is, let's say, the intermediate, the contact with that. Okay, so you see, and so what happened? Bordeaux received his student in this place here, and it's a little painting that's called Matin de Printemps, and it shows, let's say, one street who's called La Rue Montana, who still exists, and from the corner of his own house, you see, you have to imagine that he lived on Napoleon Street, and Montana is like this. So from his balcony, I think that's what he saw. But the two doors that you see at the dark entering here are the door of the atelier of Bordeaux. And it's there that he made the reunion of the group who will become the automatist. And so there were some students of Beaux-Arts, some students of École du Meuble, and all these groups finally will be what we call the automatist group. And of course, Sullivan was one of them. I don't know why this picture of dancers appear. They are not at the right place. I think there was another one before. I will go back to this. And now this. Yeah, okay, that's okay. Okay, so then you see a little bit the two point départ. You have the group of Pellan, you have the group of Bourdieu, how they got organized like this. Pellan teaching at the School of Fine Arts. We don't know much how, and getting in because Maillard wanted to have some kind of star of modern art in his school, and Bourdieu having his own little circle, receiving his student in his own studio, and organizing also kind of free comment on their painting like this, and exchanging a lot. Sullivan has said herself that at the time what was so striking with Bourdieu is they were able to discuss anything with him, religion, politics, whatever they read about Freud, about Marx, and they were, it was a kind of more an intellectual milieu. With Pellan, I would say the relation was more aesthetic in a way. He was interested in art, in whatever movement that you had in Paris, but less with politics and with implication of that kind. So we can see that it could have attracted, both of them could have attracted different type of student, different type of interest also. So for Sullivan, at the end of her studies at Beaux-Arts, as I told you, there's a kind of crisis, and she decided to go to dance. Okay. Then, to go back, in fact, to what she knew, in a way. And then she will do even more than that. In 1945, she will go to New York and will follow the class of Francisca Boas. Francisca Boas, at first I had a little difficulty to understand what she represented, the modern dance movement. But she was the daughter of Franz Boas. And Franz Boas is one of the most famous anthropologists of all time. He's one who wrote quite an interesting book on primitive art. And he also makes a lot of research in the west coast of Canada and United States. He's a very knowledgeable man. He's at the beginning, let's see, of a kind of rediscovery of all these cultures of the west coast, and also even in the fight to get back to the potlatch ceremony. Boas was one of the, with Marius Barbeau, was certainly one of the most vocal men to get this. So Francisca Boas was a daughter of this great anthropologist, and she knew, for instance, Margaret Mead and all these people. And she had a school of dance in New York where Sullivan attended. And then it happened something very important for Sullivan. She understood what automatism was all about through dance. As if when the body, or the human body, let's say, is in representation, like in painting, she could not grasp it. She was like blood, like this. But the moment she understood that dance could be seen as a kind, not something like the classic ballet in which you are told how to how the form have a kind predetermined, but like Boas was trying to do more, like seeing the dance is something that comes from within. It's an expression of feelings, it's an expression of emotion. And if you don't have these emotions, your dance will be nothing. And you could be creative in dance. You could do things that were not done and all that. So suddenly, what she was not able maybe to understand in painting, she got it through the medium of dance. As if the human body is a representation on a flat surface, as in a painting, it says nothing. But if you dance it from within, then all this idea of the unconscious and even Francisca Boas was interested by Jung also, by the collective unconscious and all that. All this came suddenly very vivid, and then you see very clearly a rapprochement of Sullivan with the automatist group from New York. She's the one that will organize a little show of automatists in New York, the first one ever organized. But no, apparently not too many people saw it because we don't heard of any reaction to it. And also she was the one to, whatever happened in New York, you see, whatever literature she could put her hand on, she could send to Montreal, and there was an exchange of information that way. There was also another girl there, two others who were in New York at the time, the sister Renaud, also did the same. One of the sister Renaud was the nanny of the children of Pierre Matisse. That was clever. That was a good idea. Pierre Matisse is one of the most important art gallery in New York at the time, and even up to his death. And he was, of course, he was the son of the painter, so he was related to Matisse too. And he had, I would say, in New York, he was representing all the new European art. For instance, Marc Cernes was presented at Pierre Matisse, Dali, these people, Chagall, and things like that. And later, Rio Per was certainly one of the star of Pierre Matisse gallery. So being the nanny of his children, Louise Renaud was able to get information of painters, some of them a little bit known, like Marcel Duchamp and people like that, and she sent to Montreal, well, you will not believe what I see today. It was, we saw Chagall, and we saw this one and that one. Anyway, so they were certainly important in opening a little bit the curiosity and the range of the group here in Montreal. But for Sullivan, what is important to understand it is that she understands through dance what she was not able to grasp from painting only when she went to this Francisca Boas school. And what I have here is few examples, of course, static like this. It doesn't give any idea of what it is, but anyway, just to illustrate that, of some of her choreography, because not only she will dance what she was told to, but she will also create her own style, her own thing. Here she danced with Jeanne Renaud, a dance is called Dualité. And if I understood well, they were like two dancers linked together and doing different movement, if you want, because the theme was kind of a duality between two aspects of the psyche, let's say. The same person could be seen from two points of view. The other example I had is more strange here. It's called, I think I have another photo of that after Monsieur. Oui, c'est ça. Alors, here it's called Black and Tan. And if you know a little bit your jazz, you will know this is a theme by Duke Ellington, Black and Tan. And okay, so the music they used for that dance was Black and Tan. And the costume that the dancer used was done by Mousseau. It doesn't seem to be very easy to dance in that, as it was like, I would say, a net in which she was closed in. And here on the left, you have Sullivan dancing that in the 40s, a long time ago. And on the right, it is another dancer, it's called Ginette Boutin, who have redo this performance much later in the 1990s. But with the same costume, by the way, by the costume of Mousseau. One of the most famous one of these dances is La Danse dans la Neige, that Sullivan did also near Saint-Hilaire. This, it seems to be like on the moon, but in fact it's just a little part of a bande neige, like we have here in Canada so easily. And what is interesting there, of course, it is the idea of making a dance performance outside of the theater. In nature, for instance. And she wanted to, her project was to have one dance by season. Let's say there will be a winter one, an autumn one, and summer. But finally, she didn't do it. The photo were taken by Maurice Perron, who was one of the group. Maurice Perron was a photographer, but he was very close to Riopelle and Gauvreau, and so he was part of the group. These photos, there's a sequence of it. I have only one example here, but and Sullivan made an album with this later on, in which you see all these photos of Danse dans la Neige. When you think of the date of this performance, it's in the late 40s, it is incredible because there were not much of this modern dance done that way at that moment. And one of the most extraordinary one, to my knowledge, was Dédale, and I can just try to describe it to you, but it started in the dark, and the only thing you saw, it was her hand extended like that. No music at all, just her breath. And she began to make a little movement like that with her hand, and then with her arm, and then with all her body. And the more it goes, the more the movement it becomes more and more. And then she goes, and this is the music of the dance. And again, this idea of making a dance without music, without any kind of pure performance like that, it's very, very new in a way. And so she really found her way there. You could say that was the breakthrough she was looking for. When she was dabbling paint and thinking of being a painter and all that, now she got it. And she got also, like I told you, this kind of idea of automatism. The next step, well, this is one of her sketch of choreography, who looks like, she called it the planets, and I imagine that you will have few dancers turning in circle or even in spiral like here, and making different movement, who will be reminiscent of the planet. When you think of dance and you think of movement of the body, I think sometimes it's interesting to go back to very old, very ancient model of perception of movement. Of course, if we take the scientific notion of movement, it doesn't apply to dance in a way, because what is Newton, for instance, used to say? Well, he said the movement of the body is very simple. It's something who goes in straight line and could be uniform in time and direction. And the only way to change its direction, you need another body who will bang on it and will change the direction. But let's say for Aristotle, for instance, it's exactly the opposite. Movement comes from inside. That's why, for instance, he says the natural movement of fire is to go toward high, and the natural movement of earth is to go down, like water also. And meaning that inside of the body you have a kind of impulse that make it go in one direction or the other. And that the circular movement is more perfect than the straight movement. That's why planets are more spiritual and are more extraordinary than anything we have on Earth, because they go in circle. And all these type of notions, in fact, are much closer to I would say, to the non-trained experience, and probably a better tool to understand modern dance, let's say, than these scientific notion of movement. Sometimes old philosophy can be useful for art criticism of today. Okay, so I just make this apartheid about this. But okay, so then there was another breakthrough in the career of Sullivan. Yeah, one of the problems we have when we deal with a very contemporary artist. Last time when I gave this lecture in French, she was in the room here. So imagine she's a very contemporary, she's still active. She's born in 1925. She doesn't like that we say that. She looks like 60. I don't know, she's in incredible shape. And so it's really a living artist. So it's more difficult in that time because we don't have the time scope to really deal with all this kind of apparently very complicated type of development. Because in the 60s, let's say after that she went a long period with only dancing and modern dance, she go back to visual arts in a way, and she go back to sculpture. She gave two reasons at the time. She says her husband was Patterson Ewan at the time. Sullivan had the chance to have many husbands. She have changed a few of them. And how to describe it? Patterson Ewan was a painter. And she said, I didn't want to compete with him, so I decided to go back to sculpture. And the other reason she gave, she had 4 kids at the time, 4 boys. And she wanted to have a studio near home, you know, so, which I understand a little bit, but not a painting studio. And I think painting is still not yet in. So something that was difficult, that was a kind of the occasion of a kind of crisis, so she doesn't want to go back to that. And sculpture was new, was something also three-dimensional, not so far from dance in a way, except that it's static, and you will see that she will try to express movement in her sculpture. Okay. Then, okay, that's a very nice idea, but what do you do? She tried first to use clay and wood, and then she discovered that this is not good for her. Indeed, you have two conceptions of sculpture in modern sculpture. You have the more traditional one, in which you could say that the artists proceed by subtraction. For instance, if you have a piece of wood and you want to make a sculpture from it, you have to remove from your piece of wood certain chips like that, and finally find the work. Michelangelo used to say that sculpture in marble is very easy. The statue is inside. You just have to remove the marble and you find it. And so you go by subtraction. Or if you want even clay, in a way, it's, you still have this kind of lump of clay that you try to model and all that. But then there was another technique, and it was the welding technique. Instead of using a kind of subtractive method, you could weld pieces together and then get a sculpture also, but in a very different way. And one of the first master of that is the man who did the work I show you on the screen, is Julio González. González was Spanish, of course, like you could imagine with his name, was a close friend of Picasso, and he was trained as a, I would say, traditional sculptor. He knew how to sculpt marble and wood and everything. But then during the war, during the First World War, he worked at the Renault automobile factories, and he learned there how to weld. And then he discovered, why not, instead of, if we want to make a metal sculpture, we could just glue together pieces, let's say a circle or even a plaque or whatever you find, and then create your sculpture that way. This welding system was maybe more improvisatory. You could not know in advance, and it was much faster also, because you just take few elements and you assemble them and you obtain, like here it's called a head. If you want, you have the mouth here with the teeth, and then you have maybe what is all in her head, I guess, and then you have the hair on the top here. So you have a kind of very reduced head, but done with elements like this have been glued together, so to speak. So this is the other possibility. Let's say González did also this famous cactus man, done the same way also, by assembling many aspects. One artist who will right away understand the importance of the González discovery will be Picasso himself. And Picasso will make this construction in wire here that you see on the left. In fact, it is González himself who made let's see, the actual welding of the piece. But of course, the conception is from Picasso. And what we think it is, it's a kind of, if you see here, you have a little circle. This is the head of the personage. And, well, his body is a little bit lost here, but let's say you have a big circle here, which can be his body. And then his two hands will be these two triangles. And the more you think of it, it is as if you were looking at a charioteer in a way. It's like a Roman chariot, a man who is behind like this, holding the rein, and the horse is not there, but they go so fast that they disappear from the image. But this is more or less what Picasso wanted to do. Even if it looks very abstract, habitually Picasso is never abstract. It's always, there's a kind of, maybe a lot of simplification, but there is behind a subject matter. He did also a head of a woman with two, I think he used two colanders who are used a little bit like mask in a way, like if you glue them together. So really then with a paints not very convincing González sculpture, Picasso couldn't make anything with that. He enjoyed very much the improvisation of it and all that. So that was giving, let's say, a possible lead for a sculptor like Sullivan, who wanted to save some freedom of improvisation, but also to make sculpture. And indeed, she went to one French-Canadian sculptor who's called Armand Vaillancourt. Vaillancourt is a wonderful man. He's very generous and all that. And he gave her all the advice that she needed to have to really to begin to weld and to the equipment and what is needed and how to do it. This is a sculpture by Vaillancourt done, we call sculpture number 1, so it's not very compromising as a title, but it's a fact that Sullivan learned from him, and also was probably a little bit influenced by him at the beginning. You understand that this for metal sculpture, the other solution would have been bronze. And bronze is, you melt the metal and you pour it in a mold, and it's a very complicated type of process, and you lose this kind of improvisation that you have when you weld pieces one beside the others. And probably Vaillancourt was a good, was the man to really convince her that that was a way to proceed. So I will show you now a few examples of what she did. Okay. This one, untitled, 1960. Well, it is really like she learned the element, you see, of this welding process. Okay, it's in metal. You have pieces that were cut in advance and then glued together to end up a little bit like a tree, I would say. Or if you want, almost also like a personage, like a figure with extended arm. As if sculpture, because it's three-dimensional, could go closer to dance in a way. Right? It's static, but in a way it's also a kind of figure in space. So that was one of the early, let's say, learning effort that she did at that moment. Another one, well, in my idea, is a little bit more successful. It is this Maison pour un triangle, House for a Triangle of 1960, in which you see kind of a very geometric structure with angles, and inside of it there's a kind of little triangle who seems to fall inside of the structure and have different angles if you follow it. Also, you notice there's no pedestal. This will be an element of sculpture that will be very much liked by modern sculpture. Sculpture belongs to the same floor than the onlooker, which is not true of painting. When you look at painting, you don't look at your feet. You're always a little bit like that, and painting doesn't belong to the world in which you belong. But sculpture could. Of course, the pedestal of old sculpture cut the effect and bring it more close to the painting. But modern sculpture very often use the floor, if not to make a completely floor piece, let's say like Carl Andre or other sculpture like that use even flatting on the ground and oblige you to look down. But here, okay, there's no pedestal. The sculpture could go on the ground directly and be part of the word of the onlooker, if you want. A little bit like a dancer could be in relation to other people also. Another technique that she used, all these sculptures have very often have no title, like this one either. It's a 1967. It's done, again, in iron. And, but what is another technique that she tried, and maybe not too successfully, it's to bend the sheet of metal. What you have here, it's a kind of sheet of metal bent, really mechanically and all that. That was another way to avoid the process of molding and all that, and to really transform, let's say, the form in something else. That could be another of these solutions. Yeah, it begins to be more interesting when she introduced the circle in her sculpture. Here, in this one, is again called chute concentrique. Well, how can I translate it? A kind of a concentric fall, if you want. In fact, there's the two movements. You have a movement of ascension here on this side and a movement of descent on the other side. And you can see that the main axis there is a little bit tilted, as if really we are dealing more with movement. But the other aspect also, it is that it becomes to be more and more flat in a way. As if that through sculpture, she's going toward a kind of representation that is more close to painting. As if through sculpture, she will begin to tame this difficulty that she had with painting by treating, let's say, all the elements here almost in the same plan. You don't have much of a depth, if you want, from this piece of diamond shape here and these circles. And even the fact that some of these circles are circled by lines like this, you could say, well, it's almost the opposition between a spot of paint and a line. Like if she was beginning to go toward a certain form of painting with the sculpture, should concentrate. The fact also that you are dealing, or suggesting a kind of fall or a movement, you could say, well, she integrates also some aspect of dance, as if the sculpture was treated as a personage who could fall, like you will have in a dance also. Some of them are done in aluminum, like here. This one is not title of 1967, and it reminds me a little bit of David Smith sculpture. Not so much the theme, but the treatment of aluminum. If you polish aluminum, you get this kind of effect here that the moment you move a little bit, it changes. It's like a moire pattern, if you want. And David Smith was a famous American sculptor. I've used that profusely in a series that is called Kubai. And this one is Kubai 18, I think. This one is at the Tate Gallery in London, but there's many of them all over the world. And what happened with that? Okay, maybe the presentation was very geometric, but this intervention of these polishing effect there created something closer to abstract expressionism, painterliness, if you want. And so maybe Sullivan felt something of that with the aluminum and tried to get also this less cold and less rigid aspect of to the sculpture. You had some movement to it by polishing it that way. But where it was, let's say, more crucial, I think it is when she decided to paint the sculpture in color. Then I want to make a parallel, and I will go back to this one also, with one important sculptor of an English sculptor who's called Anthony Caro. And you will understand why I want to make this parallel, speaking of Sullivan. This is a piece that he called Early One Morning, so in a way the title doesn't give you much of what it is. It's huge, this thing. It's 20 feet long. If you follow this stick here, it's about 20 feet long. So the angle that the sculpture, the photograph took, in a way, destroy a little bit this effect. You have also, you have this long horizontal, and then you have these two plaques also. And when you see it in that angle that I'm showing to you, you have the impression of a flat table, I would say. It's almost the feeling you have, it's like a table. And what I was mentioning before of the onlooker inhabiting the same space than the sculpture, it's a good example of that too. There's no pedestal, there's nothing to detach it from the floor. She's on the floor like you, it's on the floor like you, and on the other hand, you look at it as from above, like a furniture. So that's one aspect. But and then you have this kind of, at each end, you have this long stick here, who make a kind of cross shape, if you want, on one end. And then at the other hand, you have this plaque here, who seems to be on two legs also, fixed, mind you, by the kind of horizontal rod who is there. If you move, I wish I had a photo, but I don't have. If you move, you have to imagine that. If you move here, and you look directly toward this kind of sail, if you want, that you have there, this kind of square, or this rectangle, if you are here, and you look directly there, what happened? It's strange, because in a way you are suddenly in front of a painting. You forget about this long stretch of horizontal thing, and you are in front of well, you would say a very minimal painting. It's a red on red on red on red, but anyway, it's like a painting. It's just a square. So when you are on the side, it's a sculpture. It's almost like a furniture. And when you are in the axis of the sculpture, you see suddenly this big, and almost also this idea of a kind of easel. If you want, these two legs look a little bit like an easel. Then you understand what is the role of these two rods here that you see. because now they look a little bit absurd, as if they go out of the space. But when you are in front of it, they become lines on the picture, or even they can cast a shadow on it if the lighting is good. So as if Caro was thinking of two things in his sculpture, a sculpture as such and a sculpture as a painting. And as if not only you could have these 2 points of view on a sculpture, but you cannot have them together. They are incompatible. In one hand, a sculpture is part of your space, a painting no. And when you look at a painting, you don't look at your feet. Like I said, you look in front of you, you look above you, and you forget the world in which you have. And indeed, in most of the painting, what you see in a painting have another space than the space in which you are. It could, like when Alberti says that a painting is like a window open on the world, it's exactly the feeling that we have on most of painting, where you are in front of landscape, let's say on a painting, you are not in the same space, you physically, than what is represented in a painting. And then the importance of color in this type of sculpture. Why the color? The color at first unifies the sculpture. Everything is red. So in a way, it affirms it as an object. But on the other hand, color is also the domain of painting. When you put color in a sculpture habitually, it is because you want to have a dialogue between sculpture and painting. And if I go back to Sullivan's work now, with this kind of let's say, detour I make through Caro, you will see that, again, you have this idea of a kind of falling down, like we had before, kind of chute. You start from the top, and then suddenly all these circles seems to fall on the ground. But on the other hand, they are relatively in a kind of, I would say, narrow space, and not too deep. And the color also, and the presence of the line also around certain shapes. I think then you are dealing, in fact, with movement, with painting, with sculpture, as if the more you advance in time, the more she tried to integrate all the aspects of her work. You don't go back, you just complexify the proposal. Okay, so that was a Caro painting, and then let's say another sculpture by Sullivan, who's called kind of strange name, Kalu Kale, that is at the University of Regina, so it's not too close to us. But again, you see the same type of structure. You have a T, which is solid like this, and then you have again these movement of circles. And also the painting, also the fact that it's in red is important. In the end of the 6 days, Sullivan will experiment with plexiglass. And this always announces some change, some important change. Why? Because it's an attempt to dematerialize culture. When you treat when you use a transparent material like this, it's as if you want to remove from the sculpture this aspect of being solid and being like a human body, if you want. And as if there was a kind of dematerialization of sculpture. She called it the one, if you want. But it is interesting. It's not done directly by her. Let's say you could give. You could go to a plastic company and says, I want to have a circle like this, and they will do it for you. But this may be also, there's a kind of detachment of the artist of his work. But more important, I think this is a kind of phase of dematerialization. And indeed, what will follow was very dematerialized, as you will see. It's difficult to show it to you exactly, but I can describe what she did after. She called it les promenades. What happened in the 70s, she made few declarations to journalists saying there's too much works of art. There's too much objet d'art. Well, art should be something else. We should not add to all the sculpture and all to the painting existing. We should not add anything to it. And she said, because of that, I decided to find a way to express myself in which there will be nothing left except maybe some photos of what I did. So this promenade consisting to go from the Musée d'Art Contemporain, the Museum of Contemporary Art, but at the time it was in the Expo region in the Ile Sainte-Hélène, and to walk from there and to photograph on the way whatever she could find of even of no interest, that is not important, and to end up in the Museum of Fine Arts, to end up here. As if La Promenade, basically, it's to go from one museum to the other, but to avoid to entering in both. And then the question she asked, of course, is where is art? Is it in the museum or is it in between? This is the whole opposition between life and art, and then the very process of walking like this through from one side to the other becomes the work of art. There was some artists in, I know this is, there was some artists who did a form of walking like this as a form of art, and I'm thinking of Richard Long, for instance, an English artist who did just that. It's called walking, and what you see is the traces of his feet. I think he did it 400 times or something like that, just going in a field like that, and of course, after a while, you left a trace. And okay, he did that also as a way to dematerialize the work of art, not to be anymore adding new works, if you want, to the one we already know, and reducing the work of art in the very walking itself, and maybe with a trace that could be photographed and could be collected, by the way. There's always a kind of recuperation of that which is possible, but the first idea was to try to avoid that, try to be non-commercialized, if you want. And you could say that Long did it in a kind of natural landscape, and that Sullivan did it in an urban environment, but the reflection is a little bit similar. Try to find out of the gallery, try to find out of the commerce, try to find a new relationship between art and the world. The other thing that, the other promenade that Sullivan did was in the refinery in Montreal. I told her, if you wanted to choose a place where there's no art, this is wonderfully chosen, you know, because really there's nothing there that could remind, maybe some minimal sculpture, this huge cylinder with some imagination, and those clothes. Anyway, so she went to the refinery and walked there too and got photographs of the same thing. And there she introduced a kind of variation of that. But again, my photos are too small. But anyway, you have to imagine that she's here. Maybe it's not completely clear. Oh. No, it's her ear, and it's her ear. And what you see behind, of course, is just these huge cylinders where the petroleum is kept. But she had there it's a collage in a way. So she made a photo, and then she had, from time to time, you will see here a head, here a body, a sculpture of a Greek sculpture of the archaic time, an Apollo of the 5th century before Christ. And so, in a way, she put art in this context of non-art, as if we're bringing this sculpture there and making a kind of pun. Sometimes she used her own body for the head of the Apollo, and sometimes the opposite. She used the head of the Apollo, she used the body of the Apollo on her head. She could combine, but it's too small really to see it that way. But what you understand then, it was kind of an effort to create through a collage, I would say, to this series of photos, a kind of dialogue between non-art and art, a kind of perception of that. The third promenade that she organized was at the Terrible Fate. It was in Corridor. I don't know if you heard of this. This was an exhibition organized in Montreal during the Olympiad. And at the time, the mayor of the city was Mayor Drapeau. So the artists work, and each one have his idea. For instance, Pierre Ayotte have created a huge cross of Montreal, like the one we have on the Mont Royal, and put it on the side like this, on Sherbrooke Street. There was others who made banners and all that. Each one. What Sullivan did, it was to create a kind of glass like this, and inside with documents and photos of people, artists that she knew that lived on Sherbrooke Street. Because Corridor, of course, was Sherbrooke Street, where you had all these construction along the street. And so in front of the house of the Gauvreau, she put this case here, and what you see, the photo you see there is Claude Gauvreau and some Ulysse Courtois painting. And anyway, all the things she could find, and among the things that she put there also was her own edition of Refus Global. She had another of these vitrines like this, where if you see the style of the painting there, is more contemporary. So this was in front of L'Actuel, a little gallery where Molinari, for instance, was selling abstract art and all that. So her idea was La Légende des Artistes, as if we will find on Sherbrooke Street all the places who have been rendered famous by the fact that some of them lived there, that there was a cafe where they were going and all that. Okay, so that was very nice, but Drapeau went at the end of the day, crossed the whole Sherbrooke Street, saw all these works of art and find all of them horrible, and decided to destroy Corridor, everything. So they came with bulldozer and they destroyed all the works, including the vitrine of Sullivan. She lost her edition of Refus Global that time. It was destroyed. There was a trial after done by some of the artists claiming that the city had destroyed their work. They wanted to be compensated. They lost their trial. I was there, I know. And the judges, we were there as experts also. Monsieur Gagnon, do you think this is work of art? You know, what do you think? And I says to him, the beauty is out of fashion, but it was a... he didn't believe nor understand me, I think. Anyway, and Corridor is part of the story of Montreal, if you want. But this is quite typical also of the political implication of the automatists. I've had to try to do this. This, of course, will not be the last thing that Sullivan will do. More recent work. I will show you more, maybe a little bit more rapidly. Sometimes she works through the inclination of a dream. In that case, the work consisted of, let's say, abandoned houses in which she blocked the entrance or the window. The big block that you see here of snow or even of stone from time to time have been put by herself, and, like, to block the entrance of these things. She did the same also, a kind of video, let's see, it's just still of it, in which you see her here, building slowly, blocking completely this window. That was done in Ireland, on an island near Ireland, and then reopening it. And this was her video, let's see. You see her blocking it and then reopening. And it's based on a dream that I've told, in which she says she sees herself coming to her house and she cannot enter in the house. Every door is closed, and when she succeeds to open one, there's another one that blocked the entrance. She tried to climb on the walls, and then again, she cannot enter in the house. And you could see there's a kind of natural movement of man to go toward the house, toward the inside of the house. And maybe she felt block in her development with this very conceptual type of work that she was doing before in 7 days. Maybe she needed something more concrete, and her dream was telling that. Go back to sculpture, go back to even painting if you want, but don't stay in this kind of purely conceptual work, even if it's at the sake of adding few works of art to the one who already exist. And indeed, it's what will happen. After that, she go back to painting finally. And she made, in fact, a kind of tondo, like this kind of circular painting. You find out that you have a kind of empty square here, and you have the stone, as if really she deblocked the entrance there. The stone that we have before in the windows and in the door are now there on the floor, and you have this big hole there. Some of them, tondo number 7, are just a big piece of canvas like this with the wire in front. And now she was finally, I would say, taming the painting itself. And her last work are all paintings. Some very recently, up to last year, let's see, she's painting now. As if that she succeeded to reconciliate this old crisis of her at the beginning, but through dance, culture, conceptual art, and finally painting. It's a complex type of development. This is very often in painters of today, like they don't get defined just by one occupation, like painting, sculpture, or something. They have to try many media, and going through them, finding their way, if you want, their way of seeing things. She did a trip in Crete, and from there she brought almost figurative painting, like this one is called Uranos, and you have kind of smile here and an eye and a nose, so it can be seen as a face. Being in Crete, of course, she got interested in the mythology of Greco-Latin mythology, and as you know, the most ancient gods are very primitive and very cruel also. So at the beginning you have chaos. From chaos comes Mother Earth, Gaia. And Gaia gives birth to one son, who is Uranos, who is the sky. So right away you have earth and sky. And there's no other person around, so they make love together, and Gaia gives birth to a series of children. And Uranos is very threatened by these new children, and he decides to kill all of them. And except one, who's called Kronos, the time. This is fantastic, this whole mythology, when you think of it. And time succeeds to emasculate his father. Uranos was castrated by his son. And then, okay, Kronos is now the king. He married Rhea, his sister, because there's no other people around. And from there is born Zeus, Jupiter, if you want, who finally also killed his own father and reigned on the cosmos. So the whole mythology that Sullivan was discovering in Crete is very rough like this. It's really the beginning of mythology. Just after it becomes more and more complicated and subtle. But she got interested by this first mythology. As if, again, she go back to this kind of Jungian content, kind of collective metaphor of the past. In this one, she have created a kind of monster, if you want. You have an ibex, or maybe a goat, but who end up in human form. You see the legs here, and the landscape behind is red, and you see in the bottom here, you see a submarine. So it's called Mars, is the word of war, in a way that she wanted to represent. This is curious because habitually the goat is associated with Eros. Goats are very active animals sexually, apparently. They love it. They do it, like Louis Armstrong said. And so they love to do it. But maybe she put so big horns on it, so she become Mars. And because, of course, there was this kind of ominous submarine in the Mediterranean at the time that she saw, and she wanted to include it. These are huge canvas. They are shaped like this. You see, they are not on a square surface, if you want, and they are also done with collage. Some piece of cloth are glued one to another. She was busy with this in 1933. And the very last painting of Sullivan are surprising in a way. They are only monochrome painting, like this one. And if you were at her show here in this museum last year, you have seen many of them. They were beautifully displayed. But then again, you see what is exactly the meaning there. And they are not, let's say, full of meaning, like, let's say, a Rothko painting or things like that. They are more, what you see is what you get. It's blue. And this one is called Ulysse. The one on the right, in memory of Ulysse Comtois, who is an artist that died recently and that she knew well, and he was a wonderful man, and she made him like a symbol of him with his yellow, let's say. It makes sense. When you know Ulysse Comtois, you says if there was a color who could be associated with him, it's yellow, it's warm yellow. But she made a series also in blue, and called like this. But when you think the way it's done, by a kind of gesture repeated and repeated like this, you say, well, this is the Dédale gesture. You see that you start her dance by just a little movement of the hand, and slowly like this you get more and more involved in the surface, and you finally finish a painting. And I think it's a good recapitulation of all her life, in a way. She ended up by making a kind of controlled gestural painting, like her dance was. Also, she integrated, let's say, all the movement of the body and all that, and eventually a little bit of the sculpture, but when the sculpture goes toward painting, and she ended up with these paintings. Maybe I think she still works, she's still in good shape, enough to come to a lecture like this one, and God knows what she can do still. Okay, so we'll finish with that, and we still have one lecture. Next time we'll call her Michael Snow.